Hello and welcome. You're watching To The Point. Developments in the last few days have brought into focus a combination of challenges. Let's call them the China-Pakistan NSG triangle. Each of the three have posed problems, and the government's response, many believe, has not always been convincing. These are the issues the Prime Minister spoke about in his Times Now interview yesterday, but many ask whether he addressed the right issues or offered the right answers. So tonight we turn our attention to the China-Pakistan NSG triangle and ask, how should we respond to this combination of challenges? My guests are India's former Foreign Secretary Lalit Mansingh, India's former High Commissioner to Pakistan Satyabrat Pal, former Additional Secretary in RNAW Jaidev Ranade, a senior member of the BJP's National Executive Sheshadri Chari, and the foreign editor of the Hindustan Times, Pramit Pal Chaudhary. Pramit Pal Chaudhary, let's start with India's recent attempt to join the nuclear suppliers group. In his interview yesterday, the Prime Minister said the process has begun on a positive note. Everything has rules and will work accordingly and move forward. Yeah. Now, does the possibility of a special plenary later in the year and the appointment of Rafael Grossi, the Argentinian ambassador, as a facilitator to bring about some consensus on admitting non-NPT states suggest a positive role and a significant step forward?
Yes, because both the special envoy and the special session have only one agenda, which is India's membership. And normally you appoint a special envoy with the belief or the hope that his job will be to negotiate some sort of a compromise among the members who are against the issue, in this case India's membership, which is effectively one country, really, China. And so the appointment, which would have been, can only have been done with China's agreement, should be seen, will hopefully be seen in the positive light, that this is a sign that China is at least interested in trying to come to some sort of an arrangement.
Now, Mr. Mansingh,
but having said that, we actually don't have any full understanding of China's motives in all of this.
Let's explore the China situation, Mr. Mansingh. As the MEA spokesperson revealed in a press conference he did a couple of days ago, the Prime Minister spent virtually the entire 40 minutes of his meeting with the Chinese president in Tashkent lobbying for China's support for India's membership of the NSG. But that didn't happen. Worse still, the Chinese media today are accusing India of behaving like a spoilt child. Was it a strategic mistake on the Prime Minister's part to put in so much personal effort? Or do you accept the argument the MEA puts about that this shows that India no longer is deterred by fear of failure?
I think the latter. You know, the Prime Minister is the first diplomat of the country. He is the man in charge of foreign policy. A decision is taken, this is our goal, and the entire diplomatic machinery is put in motion. And eventually it falls on the Prime Minister to do the heavy lifting. The heaviest lifting was getting China around, and he did that.
But he hasn't got China around.
He hasn't got China around, but that's the nature of diplomacy.
But
remember, China opposed us in the East Asia Summit. We got in. China opposed us in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. We went in. So it's not as if China is going to stop us forever. I think if you look at it, we started with 38 to 10. We have ended with 47 to 1.
Well, I'm not sure actually it is 47 to 1. I'm going to correct you on that, because at the moment we do know that there are other countries like Ireland, Austria, Turkey, New Zealand, very possibly Brazil, who's a BRICS partner, very possibly Switzerland, who we even got an assurance from, who have some level of concerns about us joining. So to say 47 to 1 is to deceive ourselves.
I'm not so sure. I think the consensus is working towards India.
Well, working towards India doesn't mean we've achieved the consensus, but let me bring you in on that critical point before I go to others. You're a diplomat as well. The argument from Mr. Mansingh is that the Prime Minister's job is to do the heavy lifting. He did it, even if it didn't work this time round. That wasn't a strategic mistake. The opposite argument is that when a Prime Minister invests so much of his personal authority and then gets publicly rebuffed, it adds A, to the strains in the relationship, and B, it affects his standing personally.
Yes,
do you agree with the second argument?
I'd certainly agree with that. I would also pose a more fundamental question. that a Prime Minister is involved. Yes, he is the lead diplomat in a way, but he is involved if the issue of truly of supreme national importance. Now, why? It has not been explained why getting into the NSG, where you will only get second-class membership, is of any importance to India. It is clearly not a matter of any strategic importance. So why is the Prime Minister investing his own prestige, the prestige of his post, and so much of India's diplomatic capital?
Do you want to answer that particular question? And it's to do not with the fact that the Prime Minister was wrong to invest his personal prestige. The point you're actually hearing is that this was the wrong thing to invest his prestige in, because it's not of strategic importance that we get into the NSG.
No, I don't agree with the fact that it is not a strategic importance of getting into NSG. In fact, once we got the one-time waiver in 2008, we have started working on getting into the NSG as a full member since 2009-2010. I'll take your time, only half a minute of what our former chairman of the Atomic Energy Commission, Dr. Sri Kumar Banerjee, has said. He very clearly says Indian industry is not only poised to play a bigger contribution to India's own nuclear program, but also is on the way to becoming a competitive supplier in the global market with regard to special steels, large size foreign forgings, control instruments, software and other nuclear components and services. Remember, we have been in the nuclear activity not just in 2008 or 2006, but since 1947-48, since the time Homi Jahangir Baba started this whole process. So we have a huge research and establishment going on, and we are the one of those first countries to go into use of nuclear for peaceful purposes, and our safety standards are one of the best.
So come to the point, how does the NSG membership become critical?
We have much more to give to the NSG than what we receive from the NSG.
All right.
That is the whole idea.
Jaidev Ranade, the problem is that this is, as I said in my introduction, a triangle. It's not just China blocking India's entry. There's an active role being played by Pakistan to also ensure we don't go in. Now, a PTI report published by the Hindu today says that the Pakistan Prime Minister wrote personal letters to 17 NSG heads of government to block India's membership. I put it to you, this letter from the Pakistani Prime Minister would certainly have strengthened the resistance of countries like Turkey, a close ally of Pakistan, Ireland, New Zealand and Austria, but it might also have affected the position of countries like Brazil and Switzerland. So would you agree that though China is the country that the Indian MEA spokesman has repeatedly referred to without naming, actually there are many others that had their different levels of resistance and objection to India joining in, and Pakistan was trying to stoke those embers?
Certainly, Karan, Pakistan did play a role, but I would say that the real opposition, the heavy opposition, was from China. Others found a voice because of this opposition and also stepped in. As far as Pakistan is concerned, Pakistan and China have been colluding for quite a while to deny us admission into the United Nations Security Council and now in the NSG. And let me here mention one detail to you. That is, at the time of the nuclear summit that was held in Washington, where Nawaz Sharif was supposed to go, he finally didn't. He was supposed to meet President Xi Jinping there, the Chinese president. And they were supposed to discuss diplomatic and other measures to counter US insistence on Pakistan to go slow on the development of tactical nuclear weapons, indicating that their collusion is at quite a high level. So I would say that Pakistan's Prime Minister's letters to those 17 countries would have added to what China had already done, but primarily they would have been moved by China's influence and economic and military might.
Let me, before I come to Mr. Mansingh, raise an issue that you raised, Mr. Pal, in the articles you've written on this subject. Not only did you make the point you made earlier, that there is no strategic gain for India after the 2008 waiver in becoming a full-fledged member of the NSG, but you said the way India has gone about trying to become a member this time round has reinserted the hyphen with Pakistan, which the 2008 waiver removed. In other words, in the process, the advantage we'd got from 2008 vis-a-vis Pakistan, we've squandered.
Yes, absolutely. Firstly, could I say that it is simply not the case that you need membership of the NSG to trade. So the point that Mr. Shishanti Chari was making is simply not factually correct. The waiver is not a one-time waiver, it's a waiver that has no sunset clause, and it's a waiver that permits trade, not just imports. So if India wants to export, there is no problem. The waiver permits the export in the items it has specified. But to come to your question, yes, absolutely, because we got a waiver as a non-NPT member to trade in items that are debarred to all non-NPT members. That made India unique. Now, when we apply for membership, we are starting ab initio on exactly the same footing, notionally, as Pakistan's. Pakistan is simply not in a position to meet any criteria at all. We are. But the fact that we are an applicant, and so is Pakistan, and China has said that look at all non-NPT applicants together, means we're hyphenated.
Mr. Mansingh, let me illustrate or expand on the point you've heard rather from Mr. Pal by bringing in Pakistan, because once again this becomes a triangle. To try and meet the Chinese perceived belief that they won't let India in unless Pakistan get in, our foreign minister actually announced we had no objection to Pakistan joining. At which point, the hyphen between the two countries was inserted almost by us. Once again, we fell into the Chinese trap of facilitating our entry by agreeing to Pakistan joining, whereas Pakistan actually has no credentials to join whatsoever. They aren't even ready to do so because they haven't separated their civil and military facilities. They haven't signed the additional protocol, and yet we were quite happy to accept them so that we could get in. Did we ourselves fall into this triangular trap set by the Chinese?
No, I beg to disagree. There is no hyphen. There is actually no hyphen. Hyphen is there between two countries of almost equal competence and power. Nobody seriously believes that India and Pakistan are hyphenated anymore, like in the Cold War years. Today, the hyphenation is between India and China. It is China that is propping up Pakistan. No other country is taking Pakistan seriously. China was not even mentioned in Seoul. And Pakistanis, if they think that they are gaining ground, they are on a self-defeating move. Because so long as you emphasize that NPT is required for membership, the Pakistanis are out. There is no question of Pakistan getting in.
Let me put you a point the Prime Minister made in explanation for why his NSG attempt was getting so much criticism. He said it was because of the praise and hype surrounding his earlier visit to the United States and his successful speech to Congress. I want to quote from that bit of his answer. He said, had it not been hyped so much, there would not have been so much criticism of the NSG issue. Do you believe that?
No, it should be seen in the background of what Ambassador Lalit Mansingh just said. The whole issue is we are, as far as our foreign policy formulations are concerned, I think we are too Pakistan-centric on all these matters.
We meaning the government?
No, the general opinion that
okay, but that's another matter. First, answer, but first, before you deflect, Mr. Chari, and I'm happy for you to deflect later on, but answer my question. The Prime Minister specifically said that the reason he was getting criticized for his attempt to join the NSG is because of the hype around his visit to America and his successful speech to Congress.
If you juxtapose this with what you said in the beginning about the Chinese saying that India is a spoiled brat, there is a concern within the Chinese political and strategic community that we are moving too close to the West, and they have a reason to be uncomfortable if we do that. We are not doing it, and this is exactly what we have been trying to tell the Chinese.
But was the Prime Minister referring to the opposition to the NSG membership in China, or was he referring to criticism in India about the way he's handled it?
I don't think he was referring to any criticism, and I don't think
there was
any criticism as far as India is concerned. The whole matter has to be seen from the viewpoint of the Chinese opposition, and I would still again pursue this point which Ambassador Mansingh just said. The whole idea is not, the fear is not that India is being hyphenated with Pakistan, but India is being hyphenated with China, and that is exactly what worries China to a very large extent.
Is India being hyphenated with China? Are we actually being perceived by anyone as an equivalent of China? Because that's what hyphenation suggests.
I think it's certainly a view in Delhi for which there are perhaps not too many takers abroad as yet.
In other words, it's a slightly self-delusional view?
At the moment, I would say yes.
Very quickly on that before I go to Pramod.
Well, I just refer you to a speech with the British Chancellor of the Exchequer made yesterday, where he talks about how Britain wants to strengthen relations with its partners and mentioned China and India.
But please,
Didn't
Mr.
mention-
Mansingh,
China,
I'm
India,
going
and
to
Pakistan.
interrupt you there because frankly speaking, that was the British Chancellor of the Exchequer desperately looking to assure banks, the stock market and investors and looking for any straw to do so. I really don't think that is an equivalence that justifies this.
Any
Let's
power
not
that
go
is not
beyond this.
desperate.
I'm
One
going beyond
minute.
this.
The geopolitical desperations can drive any country to any other extent,
All right, but
anytime.
I suspect that
so
was
these
only
things
going to
change
strengthen.
overnight. These things change overnight.
I think that argument works in support of Mr. Pal's claim that this is self-delusional, but let's not get
No,
into
it's not
that.
delusional.
Pramod Pal Chaudhary, let's come to the comments the Prime Minister made about China specifically and India's relationship with China. He says, and I'm quoting him, "We can speak to China eye to eye." But he also accepts that we have a whole lot of problems pending with China. He adds, slowly and steadily, an effort is on to address these through talks. I can say that China has been cooperating with India to search for solutions. That comment puts a general positive gloss on the way India-China relations look today. Do you agree with that general positive gloss, or is it an optimistic interpretation?
Look, we had a particularly bad run with the Chinese between roughly 2008 and 2010, which resulted in India and China, India in particular, warning China at one point that we'll change our Tibet policy if you don't start rolling back some of what you're doing. That was a remarkable low as far as the relationship was concerned. Under Xi Jinping, it's been more, should we say, there's an attempt to work out to manage the relationship in a manner that doesn't result in that sort of a confrontational situation between the two. Xi seems to have concluded that he has enough problems on his hand in the South China Sea with Japan and his own domestic economic reforms. He doesn't need to pick a fight with us. This doesn't mean he necessarily cares much for us or he thinks of us as a friend. But he's prepared to at least work on the, so we've had a definite decline in incidents on the border. I think the figures of 15% were cited last year by the government. We're definitely seeing that they are not getting in the way in a number of other areas, and Xi and Modi definitely meet regularly without too much acrimony. But that doesn't mean China necessarily wants to help us, for example, get into things like the Nuclear Suppliers Group or the UNSC. They're very clear that they don't want to share they are very clear that they are the number one power in Asia and they don't really want to share that podium with anybody, Japan, India, or anybody else. We, on the other hand, have concluded that one of the ways to get China to take us a little more seriously, something that we did in UPA-1, is that the closer we tack to America, the more the Chinese seem to take us a bit more seriously. And I think that's a decision that the government made after about a year in office. And to some degree now, we'll see how it works out. But I think that to some degree that has been more or less the case. But yes, we can manage some of the problems in the relationship. And definitely it's not as confrontational as in the past.
Jaidev Ranade, in contrast to the Prime Minister's characterization of the relationship, which sounded positive or optimistic, there is a comment made by the Chinese Assistant Minister for Foreign Affairs, Li Huilai, to PTI yesterday. It's in all the papers this morning. He says that the old border dispute, as well as what he calls emerging new issues, are a major challenge for the relationship between the two countries. Doesn't that suggest that Beijing sees the differences as being stronger and deeper than Delhi is prepared to acknowledge?
I was just going to intervene earlier, request an intervention. As far as China is concerned, I think what we need to acknowledge is that they are becoming more inflexible. Under Xi Jinping, China is becoming a harder state. So I don't think there's going to be much give, as it were, from the Chinese on issues like the border, etc. In fact, the border issue has been certainly put on the back burner. Secondly, even the statements made by the Chinese foreign minister and, as you said, the assistant foreign minister on border and territorial issues have been unyielding. So I don't see any flexibility on that either. I think this, what we have seen at the NSG just now, there are 3 or 4 points that come out very clearly. The first is, as Pramit said, that China wants no other power to rival it or come close to rivaling it in this region in terms of membership of exclusive outfits like the UNSC and NSG. Second, it has sent, I think, a clear signal to the United States that Washington's writ no longer runs right across the world, and it can be challenged by China successfully as it has done. That will bolster China's own efforts to get the US to agree to a new type of big power relations with China, which it has so far declined to do. The third is actually to push us, to get Pakistan to restrain us and keep us, boxed into this region, which is what it's trying to do. So I think as far as the Chinese are concerned, it's going to be a long haul before we are able to get them to agree to what we are doing. And I would say that the next couple of years could in fact be critical for this relationship.
Now, Satyabrat Pal, speaking specifically about China, the Prime Minister said, and again I'm quoting him, foreign policy is not about changing mindsets. Foreign policy is about finding common meeting points. Where do our interests converge and how much? But surely, unless the Chinese way of thinking about India and Pakistan changes, and that's clearly a mindset change, you're not going to find those common meeting points. So is the Prime Minister making a distinction without actually a difference?
No, I understand where the Prime Minister is coming from. But diplomacy is not really about grandstanding. And so far, on the last 2 or 3 occasions, we have taken the Chinese on, not on bilateral issues, where it is possible to negotiate, give and take quietly, and then at the end each side says it's equally unhappy and everyone goes home happy, which is how, as the Prime Minister said, convergence of interests take place. What we are doing is trying to push China into a corner where it would lose face vis-a-vis third parties. And in this case, the third party is a country it's started to call its iron brother, Pakistan. And it cannot possibly be seen to be losing face, particularly at a time when it wants to project itself as a great power. So I think we are perhaps being unwise in pushing Pakistan into a corner, and if the issues, again, had been of critical importance to India, it might have made sense. But the NSG is not really something that...
Can I pursue the point he's made like this, Mr. Chari, before I go to Mr. Mansingh? Many of India's differences with China actually have the Pakistan problem at their heart. This is true of the NSG, as we know. It's true of the Chinese economic corridor in POK, where they're investing some $45 billion. It's true of their development in Gwadar and the so-called string of pearls theory. It's also true of China's reluctance to support India's membership of the Security Council. Doesn't this mean that problems that India has with China will not resolve themselves until problems that India has with Pakistan get tackled and settled? And that once again takes you back to the mindset issue.
No, it's not the question of mindset issue. This has been the issue since 1947. Successive governments in India have tried to tackle Pakistan, and now what we see, the axis between China and Pakistan is relatively a new development, considering the fact that in the 60s and the 70s, it was the US which was Pakistan's best friend. And don't forget what happened in 1971. When
in 1971, there was a genuine danger that China might launch an attack on India from the north when we were trying to get into East Pakistan. Before that, in the 60s, China was supporting Pakistan.
That was not the reason why US sent the 7th Fleet to the Bay of Bengal. So these facts we should not forget, that even now there are considerations within the US political circles
But you're
about
not answering my question. My question was that India won't sort out its problems with China until you sort out simultaneously your problems with Pakistan.
No, I don't think it will be a very right way to proceed in this direction, that we have to first sort out our problems with Pakistan and then with China. I think we have a different set of issues with China, we have a different set of formulations with China, and we are going straight ahead on those things. And I think we will have to de-link our relationship with Pakistan vis-a-vis our relationship with China.
Well, let me put that.
And a time will come when China will realize the realities, the ground realities within Pakistan.
Let me get in a view from Mr. Mansingh, who was nodding his head while you were talking, and I'm not sure whether he was agreeing with you or disagreeing. But do you accept the point that there is no linkage between our problems with Pakistan and our problems with China? And secondly, we can tackle both of them independently, and that this is not intertwined and interlinked in forming a triangle?
No, I don't quite agree with that. I think the problems are interlinked, but I think we should view Pakistan and China as a common problem. There's a common threat to us. They're working in sync, and they're working together to put India in a box. There I agree with Ms. Chari. But the fact is, we heard that we shouldn't let China lose face. What about China not letting India lose face? How often has China done that? Wanting to declare the terrorists in the UN Security Council?
You're countering Mr. Pal, and you're right to counter Mr. Pal. But just for a moment, stick to what we were talking about.
About Pakistan.
That there is a triangle over here.
Yeah, Pakistan
How then do you tackle one without tackling the other?
Pakistan problem is exaggerated. Pakistan problem is part of the problem we have with China. Pakistan is nothing without the kind of assistance that China is giving. Nuclear, military,
so which end
missile.
of the triangle do you start with? The Pakistan end, the Chinese end, or both together?
No, the serious problem with Pakistan is terrorism. The serious problem with China is everything else. Our security, our access to the seas.
Can you separate the two? Because you agreed a moment ago you can't.
Yeah, but you can separate the two in the sense that if you think of China as a bigger threat, then we shouldn't be expending so much of our energy and effort into Pakistan.
All right.
Pakistan is yesterday's problem. China is tomorrow's problem.
I wish Pakistan were yesterday's problem. If you look at the papers, it's every single morning's problem as far as our terrorist infiltration from Pakistan is concerned. And that's precisely what I'm going to do. Take a break and come back and look at what I call the Pakistan side of this intriguing triangle. To what extent does the Prime Minister's attitude to Pakistan suggest that he's master of that particular dimension of this triangle? To what extent does it suggest that perhaps, once again, he needs to relook at the whole problem? We'll be back in a moment's time for the second part of this interesting triangular discussion: India, Pakistan, China, and the NSG. See you after the break. Welcome back. You're watching To The Point. We're discussing India and what I call the China-Pakistan NSG triangle. Mr. Pal, let's come to the Prime Minister's position on Pakistan. The Prime Minister gave two reasons for his surprise visit to Lahore in December. First, he said, and I'm quoting him, "Now, I don't have to explain to the world about India's position. The world has unanimously appreciated India's position. The world sees that Pakistan finds it difficult to respond." In your eyes, did the Lahore visit change the way the world perceives the India-Pakistan issue? And is there now enhanced, increased sympathy and support for India's stand?
I think that would be going too far, but certainly there was great admiration for the courage that the Prime Minister showed in going there. The pity really is that thereafter it seemed, because it is more or less a given, that once he took that sort of initiative, that the opponents of peace in Pakistan would do everything in their power to have it aborted. And of course they did. The fact that we responded as we did, which seemed to show that we weren't quite clear what to do next, showed that it hadn't been thought through. And that was a pity. I think why the world is now fairly quiet, I think that's simply because the border is quiet, the line of control is quiet. When things between two nuclear armed states haven't descended into firing at the border, then the rest of the world tends to let things slide.
Mr. Mansingh, the second explanation the Prime Minister gave for his surprise visit to Lahore is that the world has accepted India's position on terrorism as a result. Earlier, he said, and I'm quoting him, "The world never bought India's theory on terrorism. They would dismiss it by saying it's your law and order problem. Today, the world has to accept what India has been saying about terrorism. Do you accept that? Or would you say that actually India's position on terrorism has found resonance from 2008, which is 7 years ago, 8 years ago?
Well, 2008 was the turning point. Before that, the Americans used to tell us it's a regional problem, it's a local problem, it's not a global problem. Now they have begun to accept it. But when it comes to perception of Pakistan, I think the change is quite visible in the sense the US Congress has denied the sale of F-16s to Pakistan because of Pakistan's record on terrorism. That is an indication. I wouldn't have believed this was possible, but this has happened. When the Security Council meets, 4 members out of 5 support India's case that these terrorists must be named.
But can I interrupt?
Yes.
Is that a consequence of the PM's visit to Lahore?
No. It's a process.
It's a process.
Yeah, of course.
So justifying that visit to Lahore on these grounds is wrong.
That's an oversimplification.
It's an oversimplification.
Of course.
Mr. Ranade, sadly, the Lahore trip led first to Pathankot and then to 2 separate attacks in Pampur. But the Prime Minister said that these terror incidents were a result of the fact, and again I'm quoting him, that pressure on terrorists has increased and their schemes are proving unsuccessful. He added, it's because of this disappointment that such incidents are now taking place. So do you accept that the Pathankot attack, the 2 Pampur attacks and the several smaller ones in Srinagar and Anantnag prove that India is gaining control over terrorism rather than terrorism increasing its effectiveness?
Karan, just to answer specifically the last point that you made, for that we'll have to see what the level of terror attacks was, how many people and what happened. But let me go back a minute. You were talking about the perception about terrorism and the international perception and how it changed. I think that changed after 26/11, when a lot of other countries' nationals were also involved and people saw exactly the ugly face of the kind of terrorism that was mounted out of Pakistan. Secondly, as far as the Prime Minister's visit is concerned, I think it was an act of political courage. He's going there at a time when probably his own constituency would not have approved it, and coming back. It is debatable whether the government's reaction post the visit and after the attack on Pathankot was coordinated or not, was cohesive or not. I think there were many lacunae there which could have been handled better. But in any case, as far as the terror attacks are concerned, there seems to be a feeling or an attempt to segregate the Pakistani civil government from the army and from the terrorists. I think all 3 are intertwined, and we must start accepting that before we start singling out only acts of terror as reactions to some diplomatic overture. I think the Pakistanis are really the Islamic terrorists, the civil government and the army are coordinated in their responses in using terror against India.
Now, Pramit Pal Chaudhary, speaking about the wider relationship with Pakistan, the Prime Minister raised the question about who India should speak to regarding Lakshman Rekhas that should not be crossed. And he asked, should it be the elected government or should it be, as he put it, other actors? My question is this: if the West and the Chinese can talk to Pakistan's army chief and generals, why can't India do the same?
Your assumption is that we're not trying to communicate to the army, and that's incorrect. We have been trying repeatedly through various channels to see if the army is prepared to do a dialogue, and the Pakistani army has rebuffed us consistently and has indicated they have not the slightest bit of interest in talking to the Indian government. Prime Minister has developed a very good relationship with Nawaz Sharif. Privately, he has told people that I quite like the fellow, he has the right ideas. But Nawaz Sharif is also very clear in his meetings with Modi: I have absolutely no authority to do anything that you would like me to do or that even I would like to do. Which is why we began trying to reach out to the Pakistani army, and then nothing has happened. The Pakistani army is not interested.
Well, let me put that to you. You're a former High Commissioner in Pakistan. Have we been attempting overtly, covertly, publicly or secretly to reach out to the Pakistan Army, as Pramit Pal Chaudhary has just said? And secondly, have we been repeatedly rebuffed by Pakistan's generals?
Yes, I think that's a fair assessment. We've made several attempts at various points of time. We've also ourselves been hamstrung in that when there's an elected government in place in Pakistan, we feel that we shouldn't do anything that would undermine their position. So we're caught in a cliff. We're caught in a cliff.
Given the second point you make, that we mustn't do anything that will undermine an elected government in Pakistan, how serious were the attempts we made to reach out to the Pakistan Army?
No, when these attempts were made, it was possible because the relation was perhaps not as tense as it is now.
So you're talking about historic attempts, not present-day attempts?
I am talking of attempts when I was still in service, which is about 7 years back.
Have attempts been made more recently that you're aware of?
Not that I'm aware of.
No,
Not that you're aware of?
No, I think we should also include these DGMO level talks, which are all talks with the Pakistani army.
No,
we have been talking, we have established a number of mechanisms.
Mr. Chari, those are specific talks about violations on the border. I'm talking about reaching out to the Pakistan Army in terms of the bigger issues of Kashmir and the relationship, not just the border issue.
No. We successive governments in India have always spoken and they have held dialogues with whoever is in charge of the political establishment of Pakistan. So when Musharraf became the president, he had to come down and then he had to get into the civilian dress, and then we were talking to Musharraf, and it's not that Musharraf, whatever we spoke to Musharraf, it's not that it was not conveyed to the Pakistani army, or what we are talking to the Prime Minister is not being conveyed to the Pakistani army. The Pakistan cabinet met in Pakistan Army Chief's office. So these things go together as far as Pakistan is concerned, but we can only talk to the legally elected government or whoever is at the political.
Hang on a moment. The Americans, the French, the British, the Germans and the Chinese have no problem carrying on a dual track process of talking to the elected government and the army headquarters in Rawalpindi. Why can't we?
There's no doubt about it. If we can establish certain contacts with the Pakistani army and we can explore those possibilities, and if they have not been explored earlier or they have been unsuccessful, I think we continue that experiment again.
Mr. Man Singh.
I think you're absolutely right. We have a problem on the Indian side. Other countries give the Pakistani army chief the de facto position of #1 authority in Pakistan. We have somehow been squeamish about that.
And wrongly so, or rightly so?
And wrongly so. I think if that is the authority in that country, I think we should talk to that authority. Now, we can't equate him with our army chief and expect him to come on a visit. And
he's much more important than us.
Of course, he's treated like a head of state, and he is the de facto authority.
No.
When the extreme case was when President Ghani went to Pakistan, he called on the army chief.
Absolutely.
Unprecedented. And when the army chief goes to Pakistan, to the US, with the Prime Minister, the State Department and the Pentagon treat him like a head of government.
So we need to do something similar.
We need to accept the reality and talk to that. We have not had problems in discussing with Musharraf. Why should we have problems in discussing with the present army chief?
So this is actually a change that's needed in our attitude to Pakistan.
I think so.
Very quickly, you heard Pramit Pal say that, and I imagine his sources are right because he's the foreign affairs editor of the Hindustan Times, that Nawaz Sharif is quite candidly admitted to our Prime Minister that he doesn't have the authority or the power or the position to change anything. Yet we're making an awful effort to get on with him. But then if he can't change anything and he doesn't have the power to do so, why are we wasting our effort getting on with him?
Because there is, I think that's the point that the Prime Minister made, and I agree with him, that unless there's nothing we can do to change that.
But Mr. Man Singh has just said there is. Mr. Man Singh has said there is a better attempt we can make to talk to the Pakistani army chief. Will
the Pakistani army chief talk to India?
Very quickly, since you've proposed it, if we give him the status that he thinks he has, and which you think the Americans give him, will he talk to us?
Let me suggest this. Our high commissioners have met the Pakistani army chief from time to time. That's one level. But what stops our dignitaries who go to Pakistan, let's say the External Affairs Minister, from asking for a call on the Pakistani army chief? Why shouldn't we?
And if she did, you would get a better response.
I think so.
And it may help the relationship.
Let's try it.
Worth
Why not?
trying.
I
Worth trying.
don't know. I know. I may not be privy to what has happened earlier. I don't think any Prime Minister or Defence Minister visiting Pakistan or the Home Minister would have not tried to do this. But we have to look into the
But you
internal
just had a High
dynamics.
Commissioner there saying clearly no one has tried to do it. So
No,
let's leave it at gentlemen. We're running out of time. I'm
internal
going to have to
dynamics of
end this
Pakistan.
there. We've reached a very interesting point. Shows always end at interesting points. We have a clear difference and division of opinion. Mr. Man Singh strongly advocating that we should be making a better effort to talk to the Pakistan Army Chief and give him the status he thinks he deserves. You're not so sure of it, or at
Internal
least you think
dynamics,
we've tried and never succeeded.
we should not dabble into the
And
internal
we've really run
dynamics
out of time, but this is clearly an issue of importance for the government to think about. My thanks to all my guests for joining me on that intriguing point. We end this discussion about that intriguing triangle: India, Pakistan, China, and the NSG. If you have been, thanks for watching. Goodbye. Good night.